The thick envelope from the casualty insurance company sat on my kitchen counter, and I knew before tearing the flap that the numbers inside were entirely wrong. The paper felt unusually rigid under my thumb, carrying the faint, sharp scent of toner ink that always meant a corporate system had generated an automatic warning. The refrigerator hummed a low, steady drone in my empty house, making the morning silence feel even heavier. I pulled out the renewal declaration for the property over on Elm Street. The annual premium had jumped by almost $900, and worse, the insurance company had mailed the urgent notice directly to me instead of the actual homeowners. I reached for my phone and dialed my son. Eric did not answer. His wife, Lauren, picked up on the third ring. "Is there a reason you are auditing our lives before 9 in the morning, Walter?" My daughter-in-law spoke through the speaker with a crisp and annoyed tone, accompanied by the sharp clinking of a ceramic coffee spoon. I leaned against the counter and took a slow breath. As a 68-year-old man who spent 4 decades as a construction accountant before founding Hensley Residential Capital, I am used to looking at cold facts without letting emotion get in the way. One of our long-established subsidiaries specialized in purchasing distressed residential properties across the county. At the time, it was just another division of the business. I had no idea it would eventually become part of my own family's story. "Good morning, Lauren," I said softly. "I am not auditing you. I just received the homeowner insurance renewal for your house in the mail, and the premium went up quite a bit. I wanted to ask Eric if we should raise the deductible, or if you want me to adjust the monthly reserve. Stay out of our finances," she said. The silver spoon stopped clinking against her mug. "We are adults." I closed my eyes for a second, rubbing the bridge of my nose. "I am not asking about your groceries or your vacations. I am asking about a specific property expense I currently pay. And I am telling you to back off," Lauren replied. At 39 years old, she worked as a freelance interior stylist and spent a great deal of time projecting an image of total financial independence. "We do not need you managing us. Does that mean you no longer want the $2,000 I transfer into your account every month?" A short, sharp laugh echoed through the phone speaker. "Family help does not buy you a vote on how we run our household, Walter." She disconnected the call before I could say another word. The dial tone buzzed against my ear, loud and grating. I set the phone down and walked into my home office, where the morning sun was just starting to warm the hardwood floor. I pulled a heavy leather ledger from the bottom drawer of my desk and opened the cover. I traced my index finger down the left column. For 6 years, ever since they bought that house, I had transferred exactly $2,000 to them on the first day of every month. The money was never meant as casual spending cash. Eric and Lauren relied on those funds to cover their property tax escrow shortage. The money paid the homeowner insurance. It covered their monthly homeowner association dues, and it built up a vital maintenance reserve for the aging roof. Occasionally, it even provided a cushion for the mortgage principal when my son had a slow month with his regional sales commissions. I looked at a framed photograph on the bookshelf. My late wife, Margaret, smiled back at me from a vacation we took long before she got sick. Before she passed away, Margaret had held my hand and warned me about this exact situation. She told me that giving financial help without setting firm boundaries would only build resentment. I had ignored her advice, mostly because writing checks was the only way I knew how to feel useful to my son after she was gone. My phone buzzed on the desk 3 hours later. Eric called, and his name flashed brightly on the screen. "Hey, Dad," he said. His voice sounded thin and distant, carrying the hollow acoustic echo of a car interior. He did not apologize for his wife. "Listen, Lauren is under a lot of pressure right now. Try not to make the situation worse, okay?" I sat down in my desk chair, keeping my eyes on the open ledger. Eric is 42 years old, but he has always been a peacekeeper, a man absolutely terrified of disappointing whoever happens to be standing right in front of him. I could hear his blinker ticking rhythmically in the background. "Do you want me involved in the house expenses or not, Eric?" I asked. A long pause stretched over the cellular line. "It might be better if we handle everything ourselves from now on," he finally said. "Are you sure about that?" "Yeah, we have it under control." My son hung up, and the quiet in my office felt suddenly suffocating. I opened my laptop and logged into my banking portal. The cursor hovered over the recurring transfer schedule. My chest tightened at the thought of my grandson. Noah had just turned 10, a bright boy who loved building model airplanes in the backyard. If I stopped the money, I knew Lauren might try to restrict my access to him. She had used family gatherings as a weapon before. But if I kept paying after being explicitly ordered to stay out of their finances, I was just funding my own disrespect. I clicked the cancel button. The screen flashed a green confirmation checkmark, and the $2,000 monthly lifeline was officially gone. I pushed the laptop aside, stood up, and walked over to the tall filing cabinet in the corner of the room. I unlocked the bottom drawer, and the metal tracks groaned loudly as I pulled it open. I reached into the very back and pulled out a thick closing binder. It featured a faded blue tab on the side, marking documents that had not seen the light of day in years. I carried the heavy folder to the desk and opened the thick cardboard cover. Inside sat the original real estate documents from the home purchase. The primary deed proudly named Eric and Lauren as the sole legal owners. Underneath that lay the standard paperwork for their first mortgage with Great Lakes Community Bank. But beneath those pages rested another set of documents. I ran my hand over the crisp legal paper of a properly recorded second mortgage. Hensley Residential Capital held that lien. The promissory note bore the blue ink signatures of both Eric and Lauren. I turned to page 4, where the due on sale provision sat clearly outlined in bold text. That specific clause meant the entire debt would have to be paid in full the moment they ever tried to sell the property. I closed the binder and rested my palm flat against the cover. I still hoped this paperwork would never matter. I wanted them to succeed. And I truly wanted my son to build a strong, independent life. But the reality of their requested independence arrived much faster than either of them expected. The very next morning, my computer chimed with an automated alert from the insurance company portal. I opened the message and read the single line of text on the screen. Payment method declined, and the policy cancellation review begins in 30 days. The 30-day countdown on that insurance policy ticked by in absolute silence. I did not call my son, and I did not send a warning text. He had asked me to step back, so I gave him exactly what he wanted. I would discover later, when the bank records finally came to light during the divorce, that the silence on their end was not born of confidence. It was born of panic. On the second day of the month, the homeowner association dues automatically hit their checking account. The insurance premium attempted to draft right after that, and Eric brought home a regional sales commission check that was significantly smaller than usual. Lauren had to plug the financial leak immediately. The statements would eventually show that she logged into her business credit line, transferred the exact amount they needed to survive the month, and deliberately typed the words consulting income into the memo field. She told Eric a client had paid a project invoice early, effectively hiding their household deficit behind a wall of borrowed corporate money. 2 weeks later, the corporate mail arrived at the main office of Hensley Residential Capital. Miles Carter, my general manager, walked into my workspace and dropped a thin stack of letters onto my desk. He did not say a word at first. He just tapped his index finger against the top envelope, which bore the bright red warning label of a final notice. Because my company was a recorded lien holder on the property, we received duplicate copies whenever the primary accounts went into default. The first mortgage is current, but the secondary accounts are drowning, Miles told me, crossing his arms over his chest. The homeowner association is threatening to levy fines, and the hazard insurance is sitting at the very end of its grace period. I looked at the red lettering, feeling a dull ache in my jaw. File them. You are not going to call Eric? They asked me to stay out, I said, sliding the papers toward the edge of the desk. We are treating this property exactly like any other loan in the portfolio. That Saturday, I drove to their house for Noah's 10th birthday party. I had to park halfway down the street because a massive catering van blocked the driveway. Lauren had hired a private taco cart, a balloon artist, and set up elaborate floral arrangements on every outdoor table. The heavy, humid afternoon air smelled like roasting meat, fresh cilantro, and expensive perfume. Noah ran past me with a water gun the moment I walked through the side gate. His face was flushed and covered in vanilla frosting, and he stopped just long enough to wrap his arms around my waist to thank me for the wooden model airplane I had brought him. I hugged my grandson back, feeling a sharp pang of grief settle in my chest. He was a good boy living inside a collapsing structure, and there was absolutely nothing I could do to shield him without enabling his parents. I walked inside the house to get a glass of water and escape the loud music, and the true cost of their independence was written right into the walls. A jagged brown water stain spread across the ceiling drywall just beneath the upstairs guest bathroom. It had grown by at least a foot since my last visit, and the edges were beginning to flake. The central air conditioning unit kicked on, and the furnace blower in the utility closet ground out a harsh, metallic scraping noise that meant the motor bearings were failing. On the kitchen counter, tucked carefully behind a decorative ceramic vase, I spotted a stack of unopened mail. The distinctive borders of late payment notices peeked out from the edges of the pile. Lauren walked into the kitchen right as I was looking at the envelopes. She wore a bright yellow sundress and a practiced, easy smile that did not quite reach her eyes. She moved quickly across the tile, swept the mail into a drawer, and slid it shut with a sharp click. "We are getting quotes for the ceiling next month, Walter," she said, her tone light but carrying a clear warning. "So you do not need to worry about the maintenance. We are handling it." "I see," I replied softly. I did not mention the failing furnace blower, and I certainly did not bring up the unpaid insurance. I walked back out to the patio and stood quietly near the edge of the lawn. A woman I recognized from the local country club was holding a margarita, loudly praising the party setup and complimenting the beautiful house. "We finally stopped letting family money come with family opinions," my daughter-in-law said, her voice carrying perfectly over the festive music. I took a slow sip of my iced tea. I did not correct her in front of her friends, and I did not expose the late notices sitting in her kitchen drawer. Eric was standing just a few feet away, holding a paper plate of food. My son simply looked down at the grass, turned his back to me, and walked to the other side of the yard without saying a single word. The extravagant party, with its towering balloon arches and catered food, was not just about family pride. It was a calculated performance. I did not know it while I was standing on that lawn, but Lauren was desperately trying to secure funding for a new interior design showroom. The private investor she had been courting sent an email demanding ironclad proof of cash reserves within 6 weeks. Lauren had already promised this investor that the substantial equity in her home would serve as her personal financial guarantee. The missing $2,000 a month had not just destabilized her household budget. It had threatened to collapse her entire professional identity. That night, long after the catering van drove away and the guests went home, the pressure finally broke her. I would not see her browser history recovered from the shared family computer during civil discovery until the legal discovery process tore her life open a year later, but the digital timestamp marked exactly when she made her choice. At 11:40 that evening, sitting in a house she could no longer afford to maintain, Lauren picked up her phone and typed a single question into the search bar. "How fast can I sell a house to a cash buyer without repairs?" The monitor on my desk chimed a soft, double tone just after 8 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. That specific sound was hardwired into my company software, designed to alert me whenever a property tied to one of our active loans experienced a major public status change. I set my coffee mug down, grabbed the mouse, and clicked the flashing notification in the corner of the screen. A web page loaded, displaying the familiar address on Elm Street. My chest tightened immediately. Right there on the screen, blazing in high definition, was a live real estate listing for Eric and Lauren's house. The main photograph showcased the wide front porch, the freshly painted shutters, and the vibrant red rose bushes my Margaret had planted with her own hands 6 years ago. Seeing those flowers reduced to a digital marketing tool felt like a physical blow, far sharper than any financial concern. I leaned closer to the monitor and scrolled down to the property description. The text was aggressive and rushed, practically shouting at potential buyers. Motivated seller. Immediate close required. Property sold entirely as is. Cash offers only. I clicked through the gallery of interior shots, studying the angles. The listing photographer had done an excellent job of capturing the natural light in the living room and the upgraded kitchen counters. They had also performed an absolute miracle by completely avoiding the upstairs hallway. There was not a single image showing the spreading water damage on the ceiling, and the polished description made zero mention of the failing furnace I had heard grinding away just a few weeks prior. I pushed my chair back and stared at the empty wall across my office. How in the world had my daughter-in-law managed to list a jointly owned asset without triggering a massive argument with my son? I would not learn the mechanical truth of that morning until much later. Long after their marriage finally fractured, and the legal discovery process forced every secret into the light. Eric would eventually sit across from me at a diner and confess that he had been trapped in a quarterly sales meeting when his phone buzzed. Lauren had sent him a quick message claiming she was talking to a broker about a simple refinance, a move to restructure their equity and lower their monthly payments. She asked him to forward an authentication code to verify his identity for the initial paperwork. My son, terrified of confrontation and eager to make the crushing financial pressure disappear, simply forwarded the 6 digits. He never bothered to read the attached document file. He handed his wife the authority to sell his home while drinking terrible conference room coffee. And Lauren made sure nobody would be around to correct his mistake. When the listing agent, a local woman named Samantha Price, asked about the family name on the original purchase documents, my daughter-in-law issued a very clear directive. The email chain Samantha later handed over to her brokerage attorney proved it beyond a shadow of a doubt. Lauren had written the instruction in plain text, demanding that the agent never contact Walter Hensley under any circumstances. She claimed I had helped with the down payment years ago but held absolutely no legal ownership of the property. She was perfectly right about the ownership. She was dangerously wrong about the rest of it. I picked up my phone and called Diane Mercer. My attorney answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and completely devoid of panic. I explained the active listing, the missing photographs of the water damage, and the aggressive asking price, which Lauren had set well below market value to ensure a rapid cash closing. They hold the legal deed. Walter, Diane said over the line, the steady sound of a keyboard clacking echoing in her office. Eric and Lauren are the owners of record. They have every right to put that property on the open market. I understand the deed, I replied, tracing the wooden edge of my desk with my thumb. But she is trying to run a fast cash closing to get out from under the deferred maintenance and her hidden debt. Let her try, the attorney advised smoothly, stopping her typing. Your company holds a properly recorded second mortgage. The law is incredibly clear on this matter. They can sell the house to anyone they want, but that specific debt must be satisfied at the closing table before the sellers receive a single penny of profit. You cannot interfere with the sale, Walter. You cannot misrepresent your position to the buyer, and you cannot sabotage the listing. I have no intention of interfering, I told her, feeling the cold logic settle into my bones. Good. Because a legitimate company is perfectly entitled to submit a lawful, market-based offer on a public listing. Diane ended the call, leaving me alone in the quiet of my office. I looked back at the computer screen, my eyes tracing the outline of Margaret's rose bushes one more time. The temptation to pick up the phone was overwhelming. I could call Eric right then, shatter the morning meeting, and warn him that a sale was not a refinance. I could tell him he was losing his home, and that his wife was navigating them straight into a brick wall. But I remembered his distant voice on the phone weeks ago, telling me to stay out of it. I remembered Lauren laughing at me, claiming family help did not buy me a seat at their table. If I warned them now, I would just be rescuing them again. I would be paying their emotional tab, shielding them from the consequences of their own signatures and their own arrogance. I opened a new window on my computer and routed a direct message to Miles. I did not include any family history or personal grievances in the note. I simply attached the listing link and asked him to evaluate the property exactly as he would any other distressed asset in our target market. 2 hours later, my office door swung open. Miles walked in holding a printed single-page summary. He dropped the paper onto my desk, tapping his heavy brass pen against the asking price Lauren and her agent had established. At that price, this house will not stay on the market through the weekend, my manager said, leaning forward with a purely professional glint in his eye. It is a fire sale. Even factoring in the water damage upstairs and the inevitable HVAC replacement, the margin is incredibly solid. I looked down at the printed numbers, letting the finality of the moment wash over me. The long cycle of begging for respect was finally over. I did not have to control them, and I did not have to save them. Prepare a clean cash offer, I told him. The property inspection report landed on my desk 2 days later. The thick stack of paper sat bound inside a clear plastic folder, and the pages carried the faint, sharp scent of fresh printer toner. Miles Carter, my general manager, pulled up a leather guest chair and leaned forward, resting his forearms on the edge of my desk. He had walked the Elm Street property that morning alongside Samantha Price, the listing agent, playing the role of a standard corporate buyer to absolute perfection. "The cosmetic upgrades in the kitchen are completely hiding a structural nightmare," Miles said, tapping his heavy brass pen against the cover of the report. He laid out the glossy photographs across my blotter. My eyes scanned the images, taking in the severe roof flashing damage and the massive water intrusion spreading across the upstairs ceiling drywall. The furnace motor was officially failing, and the exterior siding violated several homeowner association guidelines. My general manager did not let any family sentiment cloud his math. He calculated the necessary repair budget down to the final nail, and the numbers were staggering. The house I had helped my son buy was quietly rotting from the inside out. We drafted the formal purchase agreement that afternoon under the name HRC Property Renewal. The entity operated as a fully registered subsidiary of Hensley Residential Capital, a legally distinct branch that I completely controlled. Our terms were simple, aggressive, and highly attractive to a panicked seller. We submitted an all-cash offer with a strict 14-day closing period, and we included absolutely no financing contingencies. We agreed to accept the house exactly as it stood, letting the steep repair costs justify our lower negotiated price. My son's wife received that paperwork the very same day. She looked at the signature line, saw a generic corporate buyer, and assumed she had hooked a faceless investment firm. She never once recognized the company name. When the ratified contract arrived in my email inbox later that evening, I immediately clicked the attachment and scrolled to the final page. My stomach turned over, and a cold weight settled in my chest. Eric had signed the document. His electronic signature sat permanently stamped right next to hers, carrying a digital timestamp of just after 6 o'clock. He knew. My only son knew he was selling his house, and he had not even bothered to call me. According to Eric's sworn deposition during the divorce, Lauren walked into their kitchen that evening carrying a tablet instead of another refinance application. She told him the refinance was no longer possible because I had cut off the monthly support, and selling the house was now their only realistic option. She then showed him a spreadsheet claiming they would walk away with hundreds of thousands of dollars after closing. Eric was terrified of foreclosure, and he desperately wanted the crushing financial pressure to disappear. So he sat at his kitchen island and touched his finger to the screen. His signature was completely real, preserving the legal validity of the sale. The true fraud rested in the hidden business debt his wife concealed and in his own cowardly refusal to verify the math. Diane Mercer made certain we executed the corporate side of the transaction flawlessly. My longtime attorney walked into my office the next morning, carrying a heavy compliance folder, and she shut the wooden door firmly behind her. "We are not cutting a single corner on this one, Walter," she told me, dropping the thick file onto my desk. She required a comprehensive market analysis, an independent verification of the repair budget, and a formal conflict of interest disclosure. I sat at my desk and reviewed every single page, reading the fine print until my eyes ached. I signed the final corporate approval only after confirming that our company was not manipulating the market price in any way. We were submitting a fair, legal offer on a distressed property, following the exact rules of the open market. While Diane filed the corporate paperwork, my daughter-in-law was already spending her phantom wealth. The cellular text message records recovered during the civil suit painted a chilling picture of her arrogance. She had messaged a friend from her country club, bragging that the buyer was a desperate, stupid corporation. She actually typed out the words that Walter Hensley thought taking away a measly $2,000 a month would frighten them, but they were about to walk away incredibly rich. Her friend had replied to the thread, asking about the old mortgage loan I had provided years ago. Lauren dismissed it completely. She called my recorded promissory note meaningless family paperwork, stating confidently that I had no legal power to collect a single dime. She truly believed that holding the primary deed made her invincible. She confused having access to a house with actually owning it free and clear. But the quiet machinery of a real estate closing does not care about arrogance, and it does not listen to country club gossip. North County Title, The neutral escrow company handling our transaction began their mandatory background checks at the end of the week. A senior escrow officer named Janet Cole processed the property records, and her automated software system immediately generated a preliminary title report. The computer sent a secure copy of the document to all parties involved in the sale. I heard the soft chime of my email inbox, and I opened the digital file on my monitor. I scrolled slowly past the municipal tax records, past the primary bank liens, and past the basic property boundaries. My eyes stopped on page 3, right under the section detailing active encumbrances on the property. There it was, printed in bold, undeniable black letters for everyone to see. Recorded lien holder, Hensley Residential Capital. The secure email portal for Hensley Residential Capital chimed with a sharp, double tone just before lunchtime on Thursday. I set my coffee mug down on the wooden desk and clicked the flashing notification. The message originated from North County Title, sent directly by a senior escrow officer named Janet Cole. Her text was brief, highly professional, and carried a subtle undertone of procedural concern. Janet explained that the sellers of the Elm Street property had submitted a payoff estimate claiming their secondary loan had been entirely forgiven, and she needed me to verify the attached document for her final closing file. I moved the mouse and opened the digital attachment. The bright white glow of the PDF filled my monitor, displaying my own corporate letterhead. At first glance, the document looked like a standard company form, but a cold weight settled behind my ribs as I read the actual text. The balance line displayed a 0. A new paragraph sat awkwardly at the bottom of the page, claiming the debt was fully satisfied as a generous family gift. I would learn the pathetic details of how this fake document came to exist many months later, pieced together from escrow logs and my son's eventual written confession. When Janet Cole initially asked for a recorded release to clear the title, my daughter-in-law had panicked. Lauren told the escrow officer that the old mortgage was just a casual family arrangement. Janet politely informed her that title companies do not operate on casual family arrangements, demanding a current payoff statement. Backed into a corner, Lauren tried to pressure Eric. She insisted that parents only use the word loan for tax purposes, and she demanded he call me to erase the debt. My son refused, likely remembering my strict warnings about the money over the years, so his wife decided to get creative with our corporate history. The interior stylist had dug up an old, unsigned payoff estimate I had mailed to them 3 years prior. She scanned the original estimate, opened the PDF in an editing program, changed the payoff amount, and saved it under Eric's Windows profile before emailing it to the realtor. Fortunately, the woman did not attempt to forge my actual handwritten signature. The misconduct remained a serious material misrepresentation, but it avoided crossing the immediate line into criminal forgery. She sent the altered file to her real estate agent, hoping it would simply slip past the title company unnoticed. She made one massive, careless mistake along the way. I right-clicked the file on my screen and opened the Advanced Document Properties. The original metadata popped up in a small gray box, detailing exactly when the file was created and modified. Under the author profile, the computer displayed 2 words, Eric Hensley. My jaw tightened, and a sudden wave of nausea washed over me. The cold reality of that digital name hit me far harder than the missing thousands ever could. I stared at the screen, wondering if my only son had actually sat at his desk and actively helped his wife erase my existence. Did Eric type those words? Did he agree to defraud my company just to maintain his comfortable lifestyle? I picked up my phone and called Diane Mercer. My attorney answered immediately, listening in complete silence as I explained the altered estimate and the digital footprint pointing directly at Eric. Save the original email file to your secure server, the attorney instructed, her voice clinically precise and completely devoid of emotion. Print a hard copy, timestamp it, and put it in your physical safe right now. Do not call your son, Walter, and absolutely do not confront his wife. His name is on the document properties, Diane, I said, rubbing the bridge of my nose. Metadata proves which user profile was logged into the computer. But it does not prove who was sitting at the keyboard, she replied smoothly. Preserve the evidence. We will let the closing process handle the rest. I hung up the phone and walked out to the main office floor. The anger I expected to feel was entirely absent, replaced by a heavy, suffocating grief. The woman I had financially supported for 6 long years had not merely misunderstood a financial boundary. She had taken deliberate, documented steps to wipe out a legal debt, and she had used a computer profile bearing my son's name to do it. Miles Carter was standing by the printer, reviewing a stack of fresh appraisals. I handed my general manager the printed copy of the fake estimate. He took one look at the altered font, saw the zero balance, and shook his head in slow disbelief. "Send Janet Cole the official payoff procedure," I told him, keeping my voice low and steady. "Give her the certified ledger from day one, every tax advance, every insurance premium, and the full accrued interest." Miles walked straight to his desk. He compiled the real financial history, generating a pristine document that proved the exact balance owed. He transmitted the verified file back to North County Title within 10 minutes, permanently locking the true numbers into the escrow record. The trap finally snapped shut late that afternoon. My direct office line rang just before 5 o'clock. Janet Cole was on the other end, and the seasoned escrow officer sounded incredibly tired. She told me she was calling to provide a courtesy update on the file discrepancy. "I just spoke to the seller on the phone," Janet said, the sound of shuffling paper echoing in the background. "I informed her that the document she submitted does not match the official records provided by the lender." I leaned back in my leather chair, staring at the framed photograph of Margaret on my bookshelf. How did she react? "She was highly defensive," Janet replied calmly. "She demanded to know the exact name of the corporate representative handling the file." "And what did you say?" "I gave her exactly one name," Janet said. "Walter Hensley." The heavy oak clock on my office wall ticked past 9 on Friday morning before my cell phone finally vibrated across the desk. The caller identification displayed my daughter-in-law's name. I let the device buzz 3 times, watching the screen light up the dark mahogany wood before picking it up and pressing the green button. "That family loan was never meant to be collected in full, Walter," Lauren said. She did not bother saying hello. Her voice carried a thin, sharp edge, like glass dragged across concrete. "You know exactly what you are doing." "The recorded note states otherwise," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly flat. "It is a legal obligation. You are stealing from your own son. You are taking money right out of his pocket over some ancient paperwork." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. "I did not list the property on Elm Street. I did not set the rock-bottom asking price. And I certainly did not sign your sales contract. Noah is going to lose his home because you care more about accounting ledgers than your own grandson." My hand tightened around the plastic phone case. I refused to let her use that 10-year-old boy as a shield for her financial fraud. "Does Eric know you submitted an altered payoff document to a title company yesterday?" I asked. The line went completely dead. Lauren did not yell, and she did not try to deny the accusation. She just disconnected the call, retreating into the silence she always used when backed into a corner. My son waited until his lunch hour to try his luck. When Eric called, he sounded completely exhausted, his voice carrying the familiar hollow acoustic echo of his car interior. "Dad, can you just reduce the payoff amount?" Eric asked. "Please. Lauren is losing her mind over this." I pulled my heavy leather ledger out of the bottom drawer and laid it flat on the desk. "Come down to my office, Eric. Sit in the chair across from me. We will review every single monthly payment, every property tax advance, and every insurance premium from the last 6 years. If any number in my official file is wrong, I will correct it right there on the spot." A heavy sigh echoed through the phone speaker. "I do not have time to sit and audit a 6-year-old notebook. Just knock 50 grand off the top so we can get this closing done." He still refused to look at the reality of his own life. Eric wanted a magical discount, a quick rescue to make the discomfort go away, just like he always did. "I will gladly correct any number that is wrong," I told my son. "But I will not erase a documented number simply because the truth embarrasses you." Eric hung up without saying goodbye. That afternoon, I sat in the main conference room with Miles Carter and Diane Mercer. The massive glass window overlooked the busy downtown street, but my focus remained entirely on the thick file folder spread across the polished table. "The purchase remains completely financially sound," my general manager confirmed. He tapped a printed spreadsheet with his heavy brass pen. Even with the full loan payoff and the extensive repair budget for the roof and furnace, the resale margin is solid. Diane pushed a stack of legal forms toward me. All conflict of interest disclosures are complete and properly filed. The title company has everything they need from our side as the lender, and they have everything they need from our subsidiary as the buyer. I picked up a pen and signed the final buyer authorization. Lauren assumed my quiet cooperation meant utter defeat. Because I had not tried to block the transaction or report her altered document to the authorities, she thought I had simply surrendered. Her real estate agent had likely informed her that the closing was moving forward without any delays, cementing her belief that she had somehow outsmarted the system. At 4 o'clock, my phone rang one last time. I answered, and the interior stylist did not even try to hide the smug satisfaction radiating from her voice. "We already sold the house you thought you could control behind your back," Lauren laughed. "Your little mortgage couldn't stop us." I looked away from the computer monitor and stared at the framed photograph of Margaret sitting on my bookshelf. My wife smiled back at me, frozen in a time long before our family became a battlefield of secret debts and altered paperwork. "Congratulations," I said quietly. Then I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button to end the call. I immediately dialed the main office extension for my general manager, and Miles answered on the very first ring. "Proceed exactly as approved," I instructed him. "Do not delay the funding." The woman who married my son genuinely believed that my refusal to cancel the sale meant she had won a grand victory. In reality, the very act of completing that sale activated the full payoff clause she had tried so desperately to escape. I knew exactly what was happening across town at that exact moment. Sitting in the quiet, air-conditioned office of North County Title, Janet Cole began preparing the preliminary settlement statement. She entered the contract sale price at the top of the column, and then she systematically subtracted the first mortgage, the real estate commissions, the required repair credits, and the massive, verified balance of my company loan. When the computer calculated the final line, the projected seller proceeds for Eric and Lauren sat at just under $4,000. The air conditioning inside the North County Title conference room ran high, making the polished mahogany table feel like a block of ice under my forearms. I sat quietly in the corner chair, nursing a cup of black coffee while the fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. Janet Cole arranged her thick stacks of closing documents into perfect alignment. As the authorized director of the purchasing entity, I had every legal right to attend the final signing, and I wanted to be there when the truth finally caught up to them. The heavy glass door swung open just before 2 o'clock. Lauren stepped into the room wearing a tailored white blazer, clutching a designer leather folder to her chest like a prize. She looked completely radiant, practically vibrating with the anticipation of a massive financial windfall. My son walked in a few seconds later, his shoulders slumped and dark circles bruising the skin under his eyes. My daughter-in-law stopped dead in her tracks the moment she noticed me sitting in the corner. "What is he doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp and immediate. She turned her glare toward the senior escrow officer. "This is a private real estate transaction." Janet did not even blink. The seasoned professional simply tapped her pen against the top file and gestured toward the empty chairs. "Mr. Hensley is the managing director of HRC Property Renewal. As the legal representative of the cash buyer, he is required to sign the final funding authorizations. Please take a seat." A small knot of confusion formed between Lauren's eyebrows, but she sat down next to her husband. She still had not connected the subsidiary name to my primary company. She simply wanted her money, and she was not going to let my presence ruin her victory lap. "Let us go over the preliminary settlement statement," Janet began, sliding a long sheet of legal paper across the table. "The buyer has already funded the escrow account, and distributions will occur immediately after we clear all valid payoffs." "When exactly will the wire hit my account?" Lauren interrupted, tapping her manicured fingernails against the wood. "We process wires immediately upon closing," the escrow officer answered smoothly. "But we must review the final math first." Janet took a breath and started reading down the itemized list, her tone steady and completely neutral. She listed the agreed-upon cash sale price, followed quickly by the massive deduction for the first mortgage payoff. Then she moved to the secondary liens. She read off the exact principal balance owed to Hensley Residential Capital. After that came the accrued interest, the property tax advances I had paid to save them from default, and the homeowner insurance premiums. The list continued with the delinquent homeowner association balance, the realtor commissions, the standard title costs, and finally the hefty repair credit for the rotting roof. Every hidden debt and every deferred maintenance issue they had ignored for years sat perfectly calculated on a single sheet of paper. Janet capped her pen and pointed to the very bottom line. After all, legal obligations are satisfied from the sale proceeds. Your net seller remainder is $3,842.16. The quiet in the room became absolute. Lauren stared at the paper. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out for a long moment. She ripped her designer folder open, pulled out her altered estimate, and shoved it across the table. There must be a colossal mistake, my daughter-in-law stammered, her hands trembling slightly. The secondary loan was forgiven. My estimate shows we are supposed to receive over $200,000. Janet calmly placed the official, verified payoff ledger right next to the altered document. The paper you submitted earlier this week does not match the lender records, ma'am. Title companies do not operate on unverified estimates. We operate on recorded facts. Lauren turned her head, her eyes locking onto my face with a sudden, horrifying realization. She finally understood who controlled HRC Property Renewal. My company had bought her house, and my company was the recorded lender receiving the massive payoff. Her own desperate push for a rapid cash sale had triggered the exact financial trap she thought she was escaping. I had never needed to stop her, because her own greed completed the circle for me. You planned this, she whispered, her voice cracking. I did not prepare the fake document you submitted to this office, I replied quietly. Eric leaned forward, his tired eyes scanning the papers scattered across the table. He noticed the printed metadata log Janet had attached to the fraudulent estimate, highlighting the digital author profile. My son recognized his own computer login name stamped right across the top of the page. He slowly turned his head to look at his wife. You used my account on the home computer to forge a bank document? We discussed removing his loan. Lauren shot back, her face flushing a deep, angry red. I was trying to save our family from his financial abuse. We discussed asking him for a reduction, Eric said, his voice rising in volume. He pushed his chair back, putting physical distance between himself and the woman he married. We did not discuss sending false paperwork under my name. Their united front shattered right there in the title office. Eric finally saw the staggering depth of her deception, and the comfortable illusion he had protected for 12 long years completely evaporated. He realized she was not fighting for their family at all. She was simply fighting to preserve a glamorous image, using his name and his credit to finance the illusion. Janet cleared her throat, pulling their attention back to the table. Because of the discrepancy regarding the altered payoff submission, the title company must temporarily hold the final $3,842 in escrow, pending a formal review. Lauren stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. She looked at the settlement statement one last time, realizing there was no life-changing wire transfer coming to save her business. The massive equity she had bragged about at the country club had never truly belonged to her. She picked up her empty leather folder, turned on her heel, and walked out of the conference room without saying another word. My daughter-in-law pushed through the heavy glass doors of the title office, stepping out into the blazing afternoon sun with less than $4,000 to her name. I did not witness the immediate fallout of that closing table revelation. The precise details of Lauren's disastrous evening only emerged months later, carefully documented in the subpoenaed bank records, and my son's sworn deposition during the divorce proceedings. When my daughter-in-law pushed through the glass doors of the title office, she was operating on pure, desperate adrenaline. She drove her luxury sport utility vehicle straight to a commercial real estate office across town. Her grand plan required securing a lease for her new interior design showroom, and she fully intended to use her business credit card to pay the massive initial deposit. She handed the plastic card to the leasing agent with complete confidence. The payment terminal beeped a harsh, flat tone, and the screen flashed red. The transaction was declined. Lauren stormed out to her car and immediately called Great Lakes Community Bank, demanding an explanation from the customer service department. She was quickly transferred to a senior representative in the business risk division. The agent remained perfectly polite, explaining that her corporate credit line had been temporarily suspended pending a comprehensive financial review. The bank algorithms had finally caught up with her fiction. For months, the interior stylist had been transferring borrowed money from her business account into her personal checking, falsely labeling the deposits as consulting income to hide her household deficit. The bank had tolerated the unusual activity only because Lauren claimed a massive amount of personal equity in her residential home as a financial guarantee. But when the official closing documents hit the public wire, showing a net seller profit of less than $4,000, that protective equity vanished into thin air. Without the house to back her up, the circular transfers looked exactly like fraudulent account manipulation. The risk officer calmly informed her that existing funds in her checking account remained available for standard purchases, but no new credit would be issued until they verified every single deposit from the last 6 months. Her financial safety net was gone, and the professional collapse followed just a few hours later. During civil discovery, we later learned that the private investor she had been courting received updated financial information shortly after the closing. Once the investor realized her claimed cash reserves no longer existed, the proposed partnership was terminated for material misrepresentation. Once the firm realized her personal guarantee was completely worthless, they drafted a formal withdrawal letter. The notification arrived in her email inbox that evening, citing material misrepresentation and terminating their proposed partnership immediately. While Lauren watched her carefully crafted image burn to the ground, I was standing quietly inside the house on Elm Street. Miles Carter met me in the driveway 2 days after the closing, holding a fresh set of brass keys. We unlocked the front door and walked into the empty living room together. The air conditioning had been turned off, and the stagnant air smelled heavily of dust and lingering floral perfume. My general manager walked upstairs with a clipboard to evaluate the severe water damage on the ceiling, leaving me alone on the ground floor. I wandered into the kitchen, listening to the hollow echo of my leather shoes against the tile. My chest felt incredibly heavy. I had purchased this debt to stop being a victim to their entitlement, but walking through the quiet rooms brought absolutely no sense of victory. I stopped near the edge of the walk-in pantry. Just inside the wooden door frame, I spotted a series of faint pencil lines drawn directly onto the white paint. My grandson had stood against that exact spot year after year while Eric measured his height. Little dates were scribbled next to the marks, tracking Noah as he grew from a toddler into a 10-year-old boy. I reached out and traced the highest pencil line with my thumb, feeling a sudden, sharp sting in the back of my throat. "Miles," I called out, my voice breaking the heavy silence. He trotted down the carpeted stairs and stepped into the kitchen. I pointed at the wooden frame. "Cut this entire section of the door frame out before the demolition crew gets here," I instructed him. "Wrap it in moving blankets and put it in the back of my truck." I refused to let a corporate renovation erase the only pure thing left inside those walls. While I was driving home with that piece of painted wood, my son was finally doing the hard work he should have done years ago. Eric had checked into a cheap, extended-stay hotel out by the interstate highway. But before packing his bags, he opened the shared family computer on the kitchen island. He did not need a forensic specialist or a lawyer to uncover the truth. He spent nearly 2 hours reconstructing the timeline before opening the digital file directory. He clicked on the recent documents folder and found the altered payoff estimate sitting right at the top of the list. He checked the file properties, matching the modification timestamp to a Tuesday afternoon at 2:15. Then, my son pulled out his cellular phone and opened their digital doorbell camera application. The recorded video logs clearly showed his wife walking through the front door holding a coffee cup at 1 o'clock, proving she was sitting alone in the house all afternoon. Eric had been trapped in a corporate sales meeting across town at that exact moment. Finally, he opened her email, sent folder, and found the exact message transmitting the forged PDF directly to North County Title. When Lauren returned to the house after her humiliating bank phone call, Eric was waiting in the kitchen. He had laid the printed email and the digital timestamps flat across the granite counter. He told me later that his wife tried every tactic she knew. She cried, claiming she only altered the numbers to protect their future from a controlling old man. She begged him to understand the tremendous pressure she was carrying to maintain their lifestyle. But the comfortable spell was permanently broken. Eric looked at the papers, completely stripped of his usual desire to keep the peace. He told her she had never been trying to save their family. She was only trying to save an expensive image, and she had been perfectly willing to let him take the legal fall for it. Eric picked up his suitcase and walked out the front door, finally accepting the bitter reality that his own passive avoidance had allowed the deception to flourish in the first place. Lauren spent that night entirely alone in the dark, empty house. The next morning, the postal carrier dropped a certified envelope into her mailbox. It was not a past due bill or a bank notice. The return address belonged to the State Consumer Protection Division, demanding a formal written response to an official complaint regarding misleading financial documents submitted during a real estate transaction. I stared at the glowing screen of my tablet computer on Tuesday morning, reading the same paragraph 3 times just to make sure I understood the absolute audacity of the words. Lauren had taken her grievance directly to the public internet. Her social media profile featured a lengthy, dramatic story about an elderly relative using obscure legal tricks to steal her family home. The interior stylist painted herself as a complete victim of corporate greed, carefully omitting the altered payoff document, the hidden business debt, and her strict instruction to keep the cash buyer identity a secret. Her friends offered immediate sympathy in the comments section, but that digital performance did not last long. Samantha Price, the real estate agent who had brokered the fast cash sale, saw the post and recognized the massive liability it created. The agent immediately forwarded the entire transaction email chain to her corporate brokerage. By noon, a sharply worded legal preservation notice arrived in Lauren's inbox. The brokerage attorney demanded she cease making defamatory claims regarding a standard legal transaction, reminding her that they possessed written proof she had orchestrated the exact closing structure she was now attacking. My daughter-in-law scrubbed the posts from her profile within 10 minutes, but Diane Mercer had already captured clear screenshots for our permanent legal file. That hastily deleted internet post was the absolute least of her incoming problems. The investigation launched by the State Consumer Protection Division moved with agonizing, bureaucratic precision. The regulatory agency did not revoke her credentials overnight, but the formal inquiry cast a long shadow over her remaining business partnerships. When her commercial lender caught wind of the title fraud allegations, the bank issued a formal demand for repayment on her remaining credit lines. The sophisticated, wealthy image she had spent years curating was slowly unraveling into a messy pile of civil claims and unpaid invoices. Eric did not try to save the sinking ship. 2 weeks after he walked out of their empty house, my son formally filed for divorce. I read his legal petition while sitting at my kitchen table, and I found a surprising amount of honesty buried in the standard court phrasing. Eric did not claim complete innocence to protect his ego. He admitted to forwarding the electronic authentication codes without reviewing the files, and he openly acknowledged signing the final sale contract without bothering to read the actual math. His willingness to accept responsibility for his own negligence made his departure absolute, proving he was finally done hiding from reality. He came to my house the following Sunday morning. My son stood on the front porch, wearing a wrinkled cotton shirt and looking far older than 42. I unlocked the screen door and let him step into the foyer. We stood in the hallway for a long time, listening to the quiet ticking of the grandfather clock in the living room before he finally spoke. "Why did you not just warn me before you submitted the cash offer, Dad?" Eric asked, his voice cracking slightly. "You knew what she was doing. You could have stopped the sale. I warned you every single month for 6 years, I told him, keeping my tone perfectly level. I called the money a loan. I sent you quarterly statements. I offered to sit down and review the ledger with you before the closing, but you kept choosing not to look at the truth." Eric looked down at his worn leather shoes, nodding slowly. He apologized, and for the first time in his adult life, he did not follow the apology with a request for financial rescue. I did not offer him immediate forgiveness, because real trust takes time to rebuild. But I did point toward the kitchen and ask if he wanted a cup of black coffee. We were sitting at the breakfast table when the doorbell rang loudly through the house. I walked to the front room and found Lauren standing on the porch. She looked frantic, her designer clothes slightly rumpled and her hands gripping a thin leather purse with white knuckles. She demanded that I return the mortgage payoff money immediately, claiming the funds were legally stolen from her family. "That money belongs to Noah," the interior stylist insisted, her eyes darting between me and Eric, who had stepped into the hallway to see the commotion. "You are robbing your own grandson just to punish me." I turned around, opened the hall closet, and pulled out a fresh blue folder prepared by my attorney. I stepped back onto the porch and handed the thick stack of paper directly to Lauren. She opened the heavy cardboard cover, and her eyes frantically scanned the top page. "I established a protected education trust for Noah yesterday," I explained quietly, watching the color drain from her face. "A significant portion of the house proceeds went directly into that account. The funds are legally locked, managed by an independent fiduciary, and completely inaccessible to both you and Eric. I will always protect my grandson, but I will never allow his future to be used as leverage to conceal your debt." Lauren stared at the legal trust documents, her hands trembling so hard the paper rattled. The realization finally hit her. Absolute and undeniable. She could no longer use her child as a financial weapon, and the people she had manipulated for years were officially done funding her performance. She dropped the folder onto the porch floor, turned around, and walked back to her car in complete silence. 1 year later, the harsh reality of her new life was fully cemented. I was standing on the public sidewalk across from the old property on Elm Street, chatting with the general contractor who had handled our extensive corporate renovations. A cheap, used sedan slowed down near the curb. I recognized Lauren sitting behind the steering wheel, her face partially hidden by dark sunglasses. She turned her head toward the passenger window and stared at the house. A family she did not recognize was happily carrying cardboard boxes through the freshly painted front door, moving into a home that had completely moved on without her. The house on Elm Street did not belong to my company for very long. Hensley Residential Capital dispatched a full commercial contracting crew the very morning after the closing finalized. We replaced the rotting roof shingles, installed a high-efficiency furnace in the utility closet, and tore out the massive water stain, destroying the upstairs ceiling drywall. By the time the autumn leaves started falling across the neighborhood, we listed the restored property on the open market at a fair, honest price. A young couple with a newborn baby bought the place just before the Thanksgiving holiday. I never had any intention of moving into that house, and I certainly refused to hold on to it as some kind of hollow corporate trophy. My company made a perfectly legitimate profit after calculating the initial purchase price, the property taxes, the carrying costs, and the heavy repair expenses. And Lauren got to watch that new family carry their cardboard boxes right past Margaret's restored rose bushes. The woman sitting in the used, faded sedan across the street was effectively a ghost in her old neighborhood. No one walking their dogs on the concrete sidewalk recognized her. The massive brick home that had completely defined her social status simply continued existing without her, sheltering people who actually paid their own bills. Her final landing spot was incredibly harsh, but it was entirely constructed by her own hands. The interior design showroom never opened. Her business credit lines remained permanently closed, forcing her to sell the luxury sport utility vehicle and pawn her designer handbags just to cover basic groceries. She currently rents a small, cramped apartment on the industrial side of town, where the heavy diesel trucks rattle the single-pane windows every morning. The state licensing board officially suspended her professional credentials pending a larger civil fraud investigation, leaving her buried under a mountain of active repayment demands from her former lenders. She eventually signed a confidential civil settlement covering the legal costs her altered payoff submission had created. She is not sitting in a federal prison cell, because the justice system moves at a bureaucratic crawl, but her glamorous public identity is completely dead. She shares custody of Noah under a standard, court-ordered parenting plan, meaning she can no longer use my grandson as a tool for financial manipulation. The audience she spent 12 years performing for finally stopped paying the admission fee, and the curtain simply closed. My son had to learn how to walk on his own 2 feet. Eric moved into a modest, 1-bedroom apartment near his regional sales office. He started attending regular financial counseling sessions, quietly navigating the long divorce process without asking for a handout. I did not offer to pay his security deposit, and I absolutely did not cover his legal bills. For the very first time in his adult life, he pays his own expenses without looking over his shoulder for a quiet rescue check. We meet once a week for breakfast at a small diner near the interstate highway. Our relationship is not magically healed, because the quiet damage done over 12 years takes a considerable amount of time to repair. But the foundation feels entirely different now. Last Tuesday, Eric sat across the vinyl booth from me, drinking black coffee. He actually asked about my week instead of dropping subtle hints about his bank account balance. He set his thick ceramic mug down on the Formica table, watching the steam curl into the cold air. "Did you keep Mom's old closing binder on your desk, Dad?" my son asked, his voice low and steady. "I finally put it away," I told him, stirring my own coffee with a small metal spoon. "It belongs in the bottom filing cabinet," Eric nodded slowly. He picked up the printed paper check for our breakfast, pulled his own leather wallet from his pocket, and carried the bill to the cash register. He rebuilds his relationship with Noah exactly the same way, focusing on consistency rather than expensive apologies. He shows up for weekend baseball games and helps with homework instead of buying premium toys to compensate for his absence. I spent the second week of October working in my backyard with my grandson. We finally started building the wooden treehouse I had promised him at his 10th birthday party. The structure sits wedged safely between the thick, sturdy branches of an old oak tree. It is much smaller than the grand house on Elm Street, but we are building it honestly. Noah holds the yellow metal measuring tape, carefully marking each pine board with a carpenter pencil before I make the cuts with the circular saw. We hammer every single nail together. No one pretends the structure belongs to them before actually earning their place inside it. Looking up at the boy climbing through the wooden framing, the heavy weight I had carried in my chest for years finally lifted. I finally understood that you can build something out of pure love without needing to own the people living inside it. The final corporate accounting from the house resale arrived on my desk just before the winter holidays. Miles Carter handed me the settlement sheet, proving a clean, legitimate return on our investment. I did not give a single dime of that money back to my son. I routed a portion of the funds into our standard company reserves, ensuring the business remained strong. I wired the bulk of the profit directly into Noah's protected education trust, securing his future without enabling his parents to touch the principal. Finally, I took the small remainder and made a quiet, private donation to the local hospital in Margaret's name. My late wife had been completely right all those years ago. Providing overly generous financial help without setting firm boundaries only breeds deep, toxic resentment. Lauren lost the luxurious lifestyle she had built entirely on other people's money. Eric lost the comfortable, warm blanket of pretending not to know the truth. And I lost the foolish illusion that rescuing my son from his own mistakes was the exact same thing as loving him. Lauren told me to stay out of their finances. So I did. The first time I stopped saving them from the truth finally collected everything they owed. You might know exactly what it feels like to write a check just to keep the quiet peace in your family. It usually starts with the best of intentions. You see someone you love struggling, maybe your own son or daughter, and you step in to bridge the gap. You pay the property tax, you cover the insurance shortage, or you slip them a few $100s to make the month a little easier. You convince yourself that you are simply being a supportive parent. But giving financial help without establishing ironclad boundaries does not build a sturdy bridge. It builds a cage. It creates a quiet, dangerous dynamic where your generosity slowly morphs into an absolute expectation. You lie awake at night, staring at the dark ceiling, absolutely terrified that cutting off the cash flow means you will lose access to your grandchildren. And the very moment you finally decide to close your checkbook, you suddenly transform from their greatest savior into their biggest enemy. The hardest lesson to swallow is that rescuing an adult from their own financial reality is not actually an act of love. It is an act of delay. When you constantly cushion the fall, you rob them of the opportunity to learn how to stand on their own 2 feet. True financial independence is not something you can gift wrap and hand to your children. It is a heavy, uncomfortable weight that they must learn to carry completely by themselves. If someone demands the absolute right to run their own life without your input, they must also accept the total responsibility of funding that very life. You cannot demand the privileges of adulthood while secretly depending on the bank account and the good graces of your parents. Drawing that line in the sand is terrifying. It requires you to step back and watch the people you care about collide with the harsh consequences of their own choices. The deferred maintenance, the hidden credit card debt, and the carefully curated social media images will eventually collapse under their own weight. The truth has a remarkable way of balancing its own ledgers. When you finally stop paying for the performance, the heavy curtain drops, and the reality of their situation is exposed for everyone to see. Letting the chips fall where they may is the absolute only way to break a cycle of financial manipulation. You cannot control what they do with their lives, but you hold complete power over what you allow them to do with your personal resources. Love should never be treated as a transaction, and respect cannot be purchased with a monthly bank transfer. A small, honest life built on your own sweat and hard work will always hold far more value than a massive estate built on a crumbling foundation of lies and borrowed money. Now, I want to hear from those of you listening today. Have you ever found yourself trapped in a similar situation with your own family members? Have you ever had to draw a hard financial line in the sand and completely cut off your support to someone you loved? Tell me about the specific moment you finally decided to stop paying the tab, and how that single difficult choice changed your family dynamic forever. Drop your story in the comments below, because your lived experience might be the exact push someone else needs to finally set their own healthy boundaries.